Welcome to Finding Avalon, the podcast that amplifies disabled voices. I'm your host, Jenna, a disability inclusion advocate, communicator, and storyteller. This is a place where disabled folks correct the narrative by sharing authentic lived experiences. Join me as we explore life with disability through our lens, because representation matters. Welcome to a new episode of Finding Avalon. Thanks for tuning in as we focus on the people making change for meaningful inclusion, one story at a time. Today, I'm happy to be featuring an ally to the disability community, Angel Reyes-Giacalone. Angel is a registered acupuncturist and the owner of the Acupuncture and Holistic Health Center here in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. Passionate about alternative health and esoteric healing, she considers herself a lifelong learner who spends most of her spare time in the classroom. Angel has experience supporting people living with disability, chronic illness, and chronic pain through treatment and management of their conditions, and she's also got personal experience supporting a family member through disability. Angel devotes herself to caring for animals, too. She's an animal rights activist and a proud caretaker of several fur and feathered babies. Welcome, Angel.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for making the time. What do you say we get right into our questions?
Sure, sounds great.
Perfect. Well, first, I want to say it's wonderful to have an ally on the show who has your kind of personal experience. So I wanted to ask you, what made you passionate about this kind of work?
That's a really great question. And, there's several things that I think brought me to this line of work. But I have to say that my mother, who lived with disabilities and she had a lot of health issues, really, I think from an early age got me thinking about how I could help people feel better. And I really saw and witnessed firsthand how the healthcare system failed her. And so I think it just made me curious about what could help her and what could help people like her. And so that path took me on many, many journeys and led me to acupuncture. So, just I love acupuncture, everything about it. It sounds kind of strange to enjoy sticking needles in people, but I really do enjoy it so much, mainly because there's this energy that is all around us that is able to be accessible to all of us, that can help us at any given time. And acupuncture is just one way that can help unlock that mystery, that healing energy that is, again, just all around us. So that's what keeps me interested and keeps me learning and keeps me curious.
So the motivation definitely came from a very close place to your heart.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, very often, people living with disabilities have their valid symptoms dismissed by healthcare professionals, even when they're well meaning and well intentioned. Sometimes, disabled people are given unhelpful advice that can be rooted in unconscious bias, ableism, and neurotypical centered attitudes. I've heard you say before that you believe people know their bodies best and that you want to support and be guided by their experiences and needs. I'm sure many patients come to you in pain or distress, having been dismissed or perhaps even traumatized in some way in the medical system. Would you like to share your approach so that patients get dignified care when they come to your clinic?
Yes, I have personally witnessed, just going back to my mom, a lot of her symptoms were dismissed by healthcare providers. And so I got to see the other side of that, like how that affected her mental health and how discouraged she would be because she would feel, you know, an ailment and almost be scoffed at by professionals that she was quote unquote crazy or just maybe overly sensitive. There were so many words used. I remember being confused myself as a child because I could see my mom in pain. I could see my mom was suffering. I could see that she was struggling. And then for a doctor to point blank tell her that she was fine, there was nothing wrong with her, this would cause her to go into deep depression. be angry and frustrated. And so I got to see the other side of that. And so my approach with anyone, not just in clinic, but in my personal life, is just to not assume anything. Not assume a person's happy if they're displaying a big smile on their face, not assume that that their level of pain is tolerable because they're not screaming. you know I just assume I know nothing about someone else, because the truth is, unless you tell me, I'm not going to know. And um I feel like the biggest asset I can bring to clinic is just to listen, because that is really the missing piece in a lot of our broken healthcare system. There's no time to listen. There's not enough doctors. There's not enough care. There's not enough whatever resources. The system itself is set up to fail. The scheduling is a mess. The caregivers themselves are burnt out. And so when you actually listen to someone, I know when I've been listened to, like genuinely heard, that's where healing begins. When you're actually heard, because you want to be heard, you want someone to listen, you want someone to understand, you want someone to validate. It's not even that you need validation, it's just you want to be heard, right? Because your health is everything. And when it's scary when someone doesn't take you seriously, when you could feel that there's something wrong, right? It's terrifying. And so I've seen that, I've witnessed that with patients. I've heard the same stories. I mean, I don't think I'd have a practice without a failing healthcare system. Like, I fill in the gap, like people waiting for specialists, people waiting for a call back for years sometimes, and while they're waiting, they're coming to see me to get some kind of care, some kind of help. That I just show up where I'm needed. I just show up, and I don't assume, and I don't think I know. I feel like everybody is a mystery, and I have to ask the right questions to kind of figure out where I'm going to go, what is out of balance, what is strong in the system that I can help uh, with deficiencies and tonify. And so I don't assume I know. That's basically across the board: personal life, clinical life. Obviously, with friends and family, it could get a little messy. You think you know them, you have personal history, you think and then it's just about humbling yourself and recognizing that, who are you to be an expert on someone else's life? It doesn't make any sense to take that approach. Just because I have done studies on Chinese medicine doesn't mean I know more about your body than you do. You've lived with your body your whole life. How am I supposed to know? So that's kind of how I approach things. Ableism and anti-ableism are new to my vocabulary, but I definitely understand what the relevant purpose of being anti-ableist is. We live in a world that the majority, I guess, rules, and sometimes the majority doesn't make sense for everyone.
Ableism is a word that a lot of people aren't familiar with. It's like all of those other social phobias and isms: racism,
Mm-hmm.
sexism, ageism, elitism, all sorts of things. And ableism is really, in the most simplest terms, discrimination against people who have disabilities, chronic illness, neurodivergence, those types of things. And so they're seen as lesser than, right?
Yeah.
And then immediately that's a bias, because somebody thinks, well, this is a woman in front of me in pain. It's probably in her head. Well, this person has a disability. This person has mental health issues. So they can't really be trusted to tell us what's really happening. And so it's hijacking that person's humanity. It's also violating their human rights. And when you are anti-ableist, it's not just saying, well, I don't discriminate against disabled people. It's actively dismantling
Mhm.
that, saying, every day I'm going to consistently challenge myself, humble myself, like you said, have your humility and say, I need to learn more about this. And I need to
Mhm.
challenge even the language that I use. I myself, I'm a disabled person. The internalized ableism that disabled people have been force fed our whole lives, it gets into our minds, it gets into our psyches and our language. And it's something that I have to challenge myself on every single day, too, right?
Yeah, I would agree. And even something you said just now, I was thinking about, you mentioned that, being dismissed based on, oh, it's just you're a woman and it's your emotions that's causing it. That to me stands out because I feel like that's the biggest issue we have in our society. We all have emotional bodies. And I'll tell
Hmm.
you, 90% of the time I treat people, whether they come in with a physical ailment, I'm treating it through the emotional body. I'm using
Hmm.
acupuncture points that are rooted in the emotional body. But we live in a society that acts like emotions are wrong.
Yeah.
Women having them, there's something wrong with them to have them. Men, their only emotion they seem to be able to have is rage. Every other
Hmm.
emotion's wrong. And I'm sorry, but we have all emotions. All of us have them. Every single one, all the rainbow of emotions, we have them. And
Hmm.
because we're a society that is scared of our emotions or makes them wrong, they get suppressed. And when that happens, that's where stagnation shows up in the body. What does
Hmm.
that mean? Stagnation equals pain, some kind of pain, whether it's psychological, whether it's physical, or both.
I find that society tends to like to push away any relation to emotion, like distance yourself from it, as if
Hmm.
you can separate your emotions and your brain from the rest of your physical body. If you are in pain all the time, your mental health is taking a beating. I know for myself, if I'm in so much pain, I can't sleep,
Hmm.
and then I can't eat. And then do you think I'm thinking clearly? And what does that do? Does that
Exactly.
it amps up the emotions when you're
Yeah.
dismissed all the time and made to feel like you said to your mom, she would get depressed and feel so frustrated and in despair because she was not being treated properly and almost blamed and disbelieved.
Yeah.
So then that generates more emotional pain. And so then it becomes a vicious cycle, I think.
I would agree 100%. I would agree 100%. Yeah.
So anti-ableism is not just passively not discriminating against disabled people. Just like with anti racism, a lot of people say, well, I'm not racist, but they're also actively not being anti racist. If you say I'm not racist, well, I'm not saying and doing these things. When you're being anti-racist, you're calling things out. You are
Hmm.
actually taking action. You're saying, I oppose this. Not I'm passively, oh, well, I don't use those words and I don't discriminate in this way without even seeing all the other biases that may be buried deep down. So with ableism is the same thing. People might say, well, I'm not discriminating against disabled people. But if you actually really drill it down, they might realize, oh, holy smokes, I really am. So the whole anti ableism piece is being actively and consistently against disability discrimination. And so I wanted to ask you, why do you think becoming anti ableist as a practitioner, why is that important?
Well, I mean, not just in my line of work, in my personal life, because for me, that there's no separation. I don't
Hmm.
like put on a role just at work. I feel like it's important to educate people because not everyone has experience with loved ones with disabilities, or they might just be ignorant, plain and simple. It's not like they're choosing to be ignorant. In a way, they kind of are. If they can spend hours on Facebook figuring out what color potato they are, they could probably do a Google search and learn a little bit about how to be anti ableist, right? But our culture, in terms of North American culture, is very individualistic, and we learn to only focus on ourselves. So, unfortunately, for most of the population, if it doesn't affect them, then it doesn't matter. And,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and I don't mean to be rude, but that's the reality. Across the board, That's our culture, mainstream culture. We mainly, if it doesn't affect us, it doesn't really matter. But the truth is, at any point in your life, something can happen to you. You can get hit by a bus, or, you may have a child that may have a diagnosis that isn't in alignment with the norm or something like that. And I put, quotation marks because I don't really believe in that. But we should always be looking towards opening our minds and humbling ourselves and learning more about people. So, to circle back to your question, I really believe that it's our duty just to have a better world. We have to consider that maybe everyone isn't the same. I mean, it should be obvious that everyone isn't the same. They don't have the same needs. They may require a little bit more, or they may require a little bit less. It doesn't really mean there's anything wrong with them. And so I think it's important to push against policies or barriers that communities create because they don't consider other people that may be different to them. But it really isn't that far-fetched.
Mm-hmm. And Angel, we are, and when I say we, I mean the disability community, we are actually the largest, most diverse minority group on the planet. 1.6
hmm
billion people. Okay?
That's amazing.
That's like 23 or 24%, probably more, of the planet's population. And none of us are immune to aging.
hmm
None of us are immune to having an accident or an injury or an illness. Look at COVID-19. That has been a global, mass debilitating event. And then we also, as I said, we age. If we are privileged enough to live long enough, we are
hmm
going to experience illness, mobility issues, all sorts of things. We can be born that way. Genetics plays a role. And the other thing, which sometimes can be really hard to understand, is that sometimes there's no answer or explanation at all why somebody
Yeah.
has a certain condition. And for me, when I frame it like that for people, when I give trainings and talks, when people really consider that and they realize, wow, I'm just really one incident away, possibly, from
hmm
joining this exclusive club of people who have disabilities. And that's not even including neurodivergence, right?
Exactly.
I like what you said about when people are on social media going down these rabbit holes, doing these quizzes and all these kind of random things, or reading all sorts of things online. It would be great if they could consume media, kind of like what I'm making. That's a reason why I'm making this podcast,
Yeah.
is that I
Educate
want
themselves.
right. Yeah. So somebody could tune in. Maybe they're cooking their supper and they might want to listen in and go, oh, wow, I didn't know about that. And that too is education, right? And that too is
hmm
an act of anti ableism. As small and consistent as those acts can be, I think they really contribute, right?
They absolutely do contribute. And again, I just think it boils down to if it doesn't affect you, it's not really in your wheelhouse of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a hard time with that. That's where my bias steps in, where I feel like I don't get it. I don't get why you wouldn't want to learn more about
Mm-hmm.
how everyone, how their reality is, or why wouldn't you notice that's a barrier, and why wouldn't you want to take away barriers
Mm-hmm.
for people? Like, I just don't really get it.
Mm-hmm.
um but again, I understand where my perspective is rooted in, like, when you see someone go through, like, I was brought up in rural Cape Breton in the 80s. There wasn't a lot of accessibility for my mother who had mobility issues. So everything was a barrier. Going into stores, there was always steps. For many years, she wasn't even able to get out of our own house because there were steps. And it's just like ridiculous to me now when I think about it. Like, and the isolation she must have felt. Um, and then being judged for being angry all the time at the same
Yeah.
time. I'm like, I spent 4 months in isolation during COVID. That was a nightmare. And she spent years in isolation due to just lack of accessibility. And when we finally built a ramp for her, I mean, it was like a ski slope. So she couldn't go down it herself. She
Yeah.
still needed help. And that really bothered my mother. People want to be independent and not have to rely on other people for help. And um, it was a situation we were in. My dad was a minister. It was a church home, like a man's. Like, I think about that a lot, where it's like, this is a church,
Yeah.
and they were refusing to create accessibility for a person in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Like, what? That makes no sense. It's incongruent. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
again, doesn't affect me. Why would I bother? This is the
Yeah.
attitude a lot of people have, and it's unfortunately our culture, capitalism, individualism. That's how I reconcile it in my mind so that I don't become bitter and angry and go down that rabbit hole.
Well, and that's why anti-ableism is so important
It's
because
so
it's
important.
it's pushing against it, calling it out, countering it, offering
Yep,
better solutions
yep.
because a lot of people there's
They don't get
unconscious
it.
bias. Yeah, they don't realize and I truly don't believe that people wake up every day and say, "I'm gonna be I'm gonna discriminate against a disabled person today." I don't think
No,
so.
no.
They certainly don't. But they may believe the messages that they hear out in society, or they may not realize that, oh, well, until it happens to them, that
Mhm.
it doesn't really exist. And so what I try to do as an advocate and an activist is to make anti-ableism something that we're talking about, not just talking about, but acting on.
Yeah,
Yeah, your perspectives are super important. Thank you for telling me that. And also thank you for mentioning the pandemic because we know we know what the impact has been on global mental health, right? Even
yeah,
for a short period of time. And when someone is isolated, mistreated and fearful because there's a lot of fear when you know your body is turning against itself but no one's believing you.
yeah.
That is a terrifying space to be living in. You're not even surviving, really. You're barely
No.
surviving. You're not living, you're not thriving. And if we think about that, if we think about how hard the pandemic was for so many of us, and then we think, but what about people whose everyday reality is this?
I know. This is what I had hoped would come out of that,
I know
you
that
know?
compassion. Yeah.
I was just like, finally, we're all on the same page. We're all suffering together. So
Yeah.
maybe now we will stop trying to one up each other on our suffering and recognize like suffering is across the board, whether you're in a community that is, identifies as being disabled, whether you're biracial, whatever, it's across the board. We're all suffering on some level, psychological, physical, spiritual, whatever.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, I see now, like, I mean, some people really did awaken during that. And that's beautiful to see. And I definitely
Mhm.
think a spotlight has been put on mental health that it's never been put on it before. So I'm grateful for that. It's taken more seriously. People talk more openly about their struggles.
Mhm.
Obviously, we have a long way to go.
Yeah.
But if anything good came out of that nightmare of COVID, it was
Mm.
that. And people take better care of themselves, more self care. It's more trendy to take care of yourself,
Yeah.
which I think is great. This is good things that came out of COVID.
And also taking care of your neighbors and anybody who might be
Yeah,
vulnerable because disabled folks and chronically ill folks are truly the most resilient people I know because resilience is truly their only option, right? And so when you amplify, if you look at what people went through in the pandemic and you amplify that to someone's entire life, how could you not have compassion and respect for
I
that
know.
and want to make sure that you can help alleviate that in some way? It could even be
And
small
exactly.
actions, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Angel, what does allyship look like for you as a non disabled ally who's supporting people who are in the disability community, whether that's in your work, your personal life, and so on?
I think that allyship is, speaking up. raising awareness for those people that may just be completely oblivious to the needs or to the barriers, helping people to understand by sharing my own stories about my mom. About I had also had a really good friend in high school who fell and he became paralyzed. And he was an amazing man. He's also passed, so I could speak about him. So, just sharing my experiences, calling out bullshit when I see it. I'm very good
Mhm.
at that.
Good.
Oh, yeah. In my own community, I'll give an example. I worked for a rec center in my community, and I noticed one of the parents was in a wheelchair, and there was no place for him to watch his son play hockey. And so I don't know if you've ever been to a hockey rink, but there's not a lot of space when you walk in and kids going by with their hockey bags. And he would be, in that aisle to watch his son, and parents were getting mad, and I'm like, well, where do you want him to go, like drive his chair up into the bleachers? It's just impossible. So I worked for this rec center, and I actually wrote grants, and I got well, first of all, it's an HRM facility, but it wasn't wheelchair accessible, which made absolutely no sense to me at all. So I got 2 wheelchair accessible bathrooms put in through the grant writing that I did. They cut out a piece of the bleachers, and a proper ramp, not a ski slope, was built for people who had mobility issues, or that were in wheelchairs. And also, I got the doors, the buttons on the doors so that they could open themselves. Um, so that was an example of just calling out bullshit. I remember going to the board and being like, this makes no sense. And they were just looking at me like I had 3 heads, not understanding why. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, this is a public space. It needs to be wheelchair accessible. There are people in wheelchairs that come here, and they should be able to watch their children. Because even where he sat, you couldn't even see over the boards. It was just
Yeah.
absolute BS. I hope I can say that on here.
Of course you can.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I wish I had more of those examples. I'm embarrassed to say my clinic has stairs, and that's one of the big things that bother me right now. And I do have a few of my clients that have mobility issues that and have been in hospital that I do go to see uh, them, so they don't have to go up the stairs. Um, but in the future, and this has been on sort of like with my clinic partner, we've discussed in the future moving to a location that doesn't have stairs. I mean, I love where I work. It's a beautiful space, but that does bother me,
Mhm.
and has always bothered me about the space. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a perfect example of knowing where there's space to improve your clinic accessibility. And the work that you did with the grant writing, that's a good act of advocacy, because if not every community member can take part,
Hmm.
then
It's
it's
not
an
fair.
exclusion. And then there's no
It's
accessibility.
exactly. It's not fair, and we have the resources, you know?
Yeah.
We have the resources in this life. There are the resources in this life to make it equitable for everyone. Like, it shouldn't
Mhm.
be just for some.
Here in Nova Scotia, and especially in Atlantic Canada, we've got a lot of older buildings that they've got steep steps. We don't really have that level entry universal design all on one level. There's lots of large brick steps to get up into buildings. And that is an accessibility challenge for sure. But it gives me hope when I see retrofitting or, updating and changes to buildings that can be. And some buildings that have, historical property protection, of course, then they get a kind of a ramp that they can pull out and use. But those aren't always fit for purpose either, right? So when
Yeah.
I see new facilities being made and they're universal design, they have elevators. If they're all on one level, it's a level entry to come in. And yeah, it's exciting to see those spaces becoming more common, because whether you're a mom with twins in a dual wheel,
Hmm.
push chair or whatever you call it, stroller.
Stroller.
I'm clearly not a parent. I'm like, what do they call those things? But stroller, yeah, or pram. I almost said pram, like that old word. And whether you're somebody who has injured yourself in a sporting accident and you're on crutches, whether you're a senior or a person with mobility issues like me, that's dynamic. Every now and then I may have trouble getting upstairs. I may not be able to do the
Mhm.
things that I normally do. So universal design is so wonderful because it is that word. It's universal and it's
Yeah.
designed for everybody so that when you come in, if you've got your arms full with groceries or your child, or if you are a person who may not have that arm available at
Mhm.
all, you can use your elbow to strike the open button or the on
Yeah,
and off switch of lights. These are all simple things that can be implemented in households and public spaces and things like that. And I love to see it
exactly.
taking hold a bit more. Yeah.
Mhm.
What's a common misconception about disability in your experience, and how can we work to change that narrative?
I think one of the most common misconceptions, people just assume, like for my mom, people assume she wasn't intelligent because she was in a wheelchair. And that used to bother her so much. My mother was really, really brilliant. She was always reading, or she just always wanted to learn. She was well learned, and people would talk to her like in this baby voice. Oh my goodness, she would get so fired up. And I remember being confused when people would do this because, your mom's intelligent and somebody's talking to her. Like some people would talk to her like she was deaf. So they would be talking really loud or they would talk really slow. And I'm just like, what? It or another common misconception people had towards her were that she was faking. So, can you walk? I still remember so many people asking her that. Are you able to walk? And my mom was really sarcastic. I love this about her. She was like, oh, yeah, no, I'm just hanging out in this chair, trying it out. Like, why would you be in a wheelchair if you could walk? Do you
Mhm.
know what I mean? Like, it's just really odd questions, really strange.
Yeah, and when it comes to wheelchairs too, another thing I just wanted to add here is that many people who use wheelchairs can be ambulatory. They can
Mhm.
get up, they
Yes.
can walk in certain, like, if they have the strength at that time, or if they want to preserve their
Yeah.
health, they may say, you know what, I'm going to use these two or three different mobility tools as I need. Today I'm using a walker. Today I'm using a cane. Today I actually do need to be in a chair,
Yeah.
a wheelchair, right? And a lot of people think that, oh, I just saw that person's leg moving there. They're
Mhm.
not really, they don't need that chair.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you brought that up because people would assume she was paralyzed. She wasn't paralyzed. So she could some days, she had extreme rheumatoid arthritis. So there were some days that it wasn't damp and cold in Cape Breton. And she could move around,
2 or 3 days a year.
few and far between, but she could move around. And at that point, people would think she was faking. Like they would be like, oh, so you can walk, stuff like that. And it's just like
Oh, trying to catch her
straight.
out.
Yeah, it's almost like she was doing it for attention, you
Yeah,
know?
this is
This is
ableism, right?
exactly. Like, I don't know, and possibly there are people that do these things for attention, but I highly doubt it's like the majority of the population of the disabled community. Like,
I think
that
it's
just
a
doesn't add up to me. I feel like,
almost non-existent percentage that people would
yeah,
do that.
yeah. Another misconception I think is when a lot of neurodivergent people mask. And so we don't know, right? Again, assuming you know what the person feels about things when you really don't. That's why I said, like, I don't assume anything because people
Mhm.
can mask really, especially women. Women are the best maskers, like the
Because
best.
society forces us to blend
Con-
in,
yep,
people please, be of service to others,
yep.
don't make a fuss, and
Mm-hmm.
suffer in silence. And it's
Yeah,
what women have had to do, I think, for since time
yeah.
immemorial.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So I do think the big problem is just assuming. Like this is why I really check myself.
Yeah.
I don't know a thing. I just stay curious, ask questions, try to understand. And don't assume when I get those answers that they're going to be the same the next time we meet, because I think things change for people. We're not stagnant in our emotions. We're not stagnant in, like you said, some people with mobility issues, maybe one day they only need a cane, maybe the next day they need to actually be in a chair because they're maybe more stiff, or they didn't sleep that week and their body's more achy. So I don't assume based on the answers I get that I figured it out.
And it's interesting you mentioned about dynamic disability, right? People, as your mother had her hips replaced and she was able to be more mobile in ways that doesn't mean she wasn't suffering from from other ailments. But for me, I have a dynamic disability, and I explain that to people as it's constantly changing, it's constantly shifting. I can't plan for it. I don't really know what I'm going to be like. It used to be I didn't know what I'd be like month to month or season to season. And as disability and illness progresses, that can even change from hour to hour.
Yeah.
And it's very hard for people who don't understand or don't have the tolerance to even try to understand. I actually had somebody say something really ignorant to me. I mean, I've got lots of examples, but I did have somebody say to me in a professional space, "What do you get that cane for? What do you get that for?" And,
Wow.
I don't need to explain it, but of course I just basically said, "Well, I need this today." And the person said, "Huh, funny. I saw you run and jump on the bus a couple of days ago. Funny how it comes and goes."
Wow.
And as if they had caught me out like, "Aha, you fake," and this was somebody young who I would think would have more sensitivity, more sense than that. And it took me aback because it felt like I was being interrogated by a detective, and I just said, "Well, my disability changes and shifts, and you might not see me the same way each day. And if it's hard for you to figure out, imagine how hard it is for me to deal with because I don't know when it's going to happen either."
I love that answer.
And I kind of said, like, "I know it's confusing for you. It's confusing for me. It's frustrating as hell for me. I might I might plan to go to an event that I have been waiting for, to see people that I love and to do something I enjoy, and my state can change multiple times in those few hours that I may be there. And that is distressing, right? And it's confusing, but it is what it is. It really is the reality. And so, when somebody does the whole, "Oh, well, it's funny. It's funny how you limp sometimes and you don't other times." Well, eh, it's shocking to me that people even say this stuff out
I
loud.
know. I don't get
Yeah,
that. I
and
really don't.
I'm an advocate, so, like, part of my work is to help people understand and dispel these kinds of stereotypes, but at the same time, it can be quite exhausting and insulting to always have to be somebody's teachable moment, especially when you know that person has a commitment to misunderstanding what you're saying because they somehow suspect that you are making it up. And I often notice and hear from others that it happens to women more than men because we do live in a patriarchal, capitalistic, ableist society,
Mhm.
and where women are expected to hide their pain and to not even acknowledge it, right? And so that was an example of somebody who was young, who should know better. And they just thought, "Aha, I caught you out. You're not really disabled." And yeah, it's just one of many examples. When you talk about your mom, people talking down to her, I remember when my grandmother, who suffered with chronic pain her whole life and was disbelieved and made fun of, it enraged me because I saw my grandmother every day. I saw her being unable to stand up, to walk, to push herself up from a chair. She was in pain all the time. And people would make fun and say, "You're an actress and you're just looking for attention." The woman was in excruciating pain her whole life. When she finally was in a senior's home getting care, I remember as a student, I was able to visit her lots and lots because it was in my same city. I would be so embarrassed and frustrated, and so would she, when well-meaning visitors and well-meaning healthcare professionals would come in and speak to her in this high-pitched, sing-songy voice as if she was a child with the intelligence of possibly an apple, you know?
Yeah.
And she was polite to them, but you could see it really bothered her that they spoke to her like she wasn't an adult woman with a whole life experience, you know? It was just like,
Mhm.
"Oh my," and talk like really high pitched, super loud. I would be so offended. And at that time, at that age, in my early 20s, I didn't know what ableism was. I just knew that it wasn't dignified what was happening. And I remember thinking, "Oh, when I'm older, if somebody does that to me," if somebody talks to me like I'm just an object or a little child, yeah,
Mhm.
I was always frustrated because I wanted her to be treated with dignity. And even though they meant well, I know they meant well, they took good care of her, but there's a psychological aspect to that kind of care as well. You have to make sure that you're giving that person dignity and respect.
I think that that's a great word. It's the lack of dignity that really got me, and I agree with you. I don't think it's intentional, but I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't know if I have been conditioned to have empathy based on being a witness to these types of things. I really just don't get how, like, I can just put myself in someone's shoes so easily, and I just don't
Mhm,
get why that is such a stretch for people. And
mhm,
again, I try to keep myself in check because I don't know what their story is or what makes them that way. But it is hard to watch that. I literally just watched this with a patient I had in the QE2. Um, she was smart as a whip, this woman, and the nurse practitioner would come in and talk to her like she was, I don't know, like, yeah, the intelligence of an apple. I like that analogy. And I remember the nurse practitioner, I was just so confused watching this whole thing play out because this woman was brilliant, like amazing, had a beautiful history of working and, contributing to society, and just the way they spoke to her, or this particular nurse practitioner spoke to her, blew my mind. I'm like, do they not teach you this in school? Like, it's
yeah,
basic human decency, you know?
yeah. It's like I think I've noticed that there's two extremes. There's this baby talk infantilizing, and
Mhm.
then there's this gruff as if they're ordering around a disobedient child.
Yep.
You know, kind of like two extremes, and neither is
Makes
appropriate.
sense. Neither makes sense. Um,
No.
it's just bizarre. Sensitivity training, I think, should be a part of any medical, and maybe it is. And if it is, it's failing. Like, they have to
Yeah.
rethink that program or that class.
Yeah.
Um, and again, I have a huge bias against, the healthcare, just because I grew up in it. I grew up seeing it
Yeah.
fail my mother. I continue through my adulthood hearing story after story after story after story. So it's hard for me not to be biased. I
Mhm.
don't have I have some personal experience myself. After the birth of my children, I had pretty crappy experiences with nurses. But again, I'm not going to say that, you know, the healthcare system has no value. I know that it does. I just think it needs
Mhm.
to really be overhauled. And
Mhm.
one of the big things is sensitivity and bedside manner. I mean, that should be a
Yeah.
priority because that affects mental health, and mental health affects physical health and wellness. So it needs
Mhm.
to be looked at not as a separate mental health wing to the hospital, but as a whole. Interacting with your patient and talking down to them and talking to them like they have no intelligence at all and they haven't lived a life is not contributing to their wellness whatsoever.
And then when you look at all of the different biases that are embedded in these systemic barriers, we've got sexism, obviously.
Absolutely.
We've got ageism, but then we also do have xenophobia and racism. You can't just
100%.
you can't just apply one approach to all. We know in the healthcare system, women and marginalized people have much worse outcomes, aren't treated properly. And I mean with treatments, but also in the way that they are treated. I guess the interactions with healthcare professionals. But when we know that these are vulnerable people and have historically been so, probably I think that a lot of the training, if there ever has been sensitivity training, has probably been very Eurocentric, I bet, and very patriarchal themed. That's my theory.
I'd bet money on it.
Yeah. And I'm really hoping that this is going to change, because it's got to, for proper healthcare. It must be hard for you as well. It must be hard hearing and knowing that so many people are suffering or going through a rough time in the healthcare system, and they come to you for help, which is wonderful that you're there to help them. But it must be hard, because you are an empathetic person. It must be hard to witness that in multiples of people.
It can be hard. But I do find, like, I don't often go into the hospital. I have a phobia of hospitals, just from
Me
all
too.
my bad experiences. Like, I've had panic attacks. I have extreme anxiety. I don't go into them if I don't have to. And
Mhm.
recently I had been asked to go into the hospital, and I knew I needed to be there. I don't often get contacted by a team of doctors to go treat someone that wasn't my patient to begin with.
Mhm.
So I sucked it up and I went in, but I'm not gonna lie, it was very triggering, and the same behaviors that I saw growing up are still there, and that was really hard for me. That did set me back, like, mentally.
Mm.
Hearing the stories, I'm not, maybe I'm desensitized, like, I think the value I can bring is I understand, and so that makes me a better listener, and
Mhm.
that helps the person that's telling the story. So I feel like that helps me reconcile it, that
Mhm.
it's continually gotten even worse, the healthcare system. And that blows my mind, because it was terrible when I was a kid. So to see it getting even worse is just like, wow, I thought we were an advancing culture. What's going on here? It's not adding up. The math isn't mathing. And
Absolutely.
yeah.
And to have somebody like you who is an ally in the wellness world is so important, because disabled folks can rant and rail and appeal and negotiate. We can, but we really can't do it alone. There's no way without community allies that we can get enough momentum for actual meaningful change. And so that's why I'm so happy to have an ally on this season of the podcast. I really appreciate your perspectives.
Oh, thank you. Well, I feel it's an honor to be here, and I'm happy to be here.
So I ask every guest to recommend a song or two for the podcast playlist that I've created. And I'm wondering if you have any songs that speak to you or that fit the theme of what we've talked about today. And if you do, what are they and why did you choose them?
Okay, so I don't know if this is going to make any sense at all, but the first thing I thought of was Bohemian Rhapsody. I recently listened to this at a candlelight concert with a quartet, and it just blew my mind. And obviously, I love the song, but to hear it with played with strings was a totally different experience. And the reason I'm choosing this song is because it is a musical masterpiece. As we know, Freddie Mercury was a musical genius. And if he were to have asked the mainstream culture, can you put these different genres of music together? He would have been told no. Like, that doesn't make any sense. You can't blend hard rock with opera and ballads. It just doesn't make any sense. It's not the norm, right? You have to do it the same way as everyone else. And so he defied all that, and he created this amazing song that just blows your mind. It absolutely blows your mind. And I feel like this song represents the possibility that we can have in this world if we just stop excluding and creating barriers that are unnecessary. We can create this beautiful, harmonious place where everyone has what they need, because there's enough. There's enough for everyone. It's just bullshit that we don't just accept that and act on that instead of creating all this other unnecessary discord. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And there are no rules.
Yeah, like what are this with the rules that don't make sense, that don't work for like 90% of the people that live on Earth?
Mm-hmm. So what we create, and that includes creative problem solving, that
Mm-hmm.
totally applies to the lived experience of human beings, but especially human beings who can become ill or injured or have a disability. There's no rule. They try to make rules for us, but
Yeah,
I feel like a lot could be created when you push aside the stereotypes and the barriers to what can't be possible.
exactly.
I love how you describe that, because music is one of these things that I think all people respond to. Do you have another one?
I don't, because I was trying to make sense out of why I picked that song for a long time.
Thank you for sharing why you chose that song, and it was a very thought-provoking answer. And it also reminds me of the time that I won some money at a karaoke bar singing that song terribly. I sang it terribly. I think they gave me the prize to get me off the stage, but I remember being like 21 years old with $75 in my pocket for singing Bohemian Rhapsody very badly. So I might have to get that back in rotation, and it's definitely going to be added to the playlist. So, Angel, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So, I have another question for you, and I ask all of my guests this question in 3 words, whether that's 3 separate words or a simple 3-word phrase. What does disability inclusion mean to you, and why?
The phrase that I chose is "it's our birthright." I think that's self-explanatory, but it's our birthright to live a life without barriers, to be included, to have a fulfilling life where we feel loved and heard and valued and appreciated. Every single one of us, irregardless of disability, mobility, ability, it's our birthright. No one is more valuable than anyone else. No one has inherent value more than anyone else.
Very well said. When it comes to a truly inclusive community, everybody should be welcome, and not just welcome, but able to live a dignified, safe, and meaningful life, because everyone has value. Everyone has value regardless of ability,
Mhm.
regardless of race, regardless of gender, all of those things. And we really do deserve to be part of community. And I love that answer. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So, Angel, as we wrap up, what's something that you're excited about lately?
Well, I just launched my expo, my alternative health expo for September 21st, which just so happens to be on an eclipse. And I do strategically plan all of my events to align with astrological happenings. So I normally had it at the Halifax Forum for the last 14, 15 years. Um, the Halifax Body, Mind, and Spirit Expo, over 100 exhibits. Right now, the space is being used as a homeless shelter. So I wasn't able to have my show last year. And I've been kind of looking around, at venues and trying to find an appropriate place. So this will be a smaller scale, which actually I'm really excited about because it's a big undertaking to have over 100 exhibits. Um, but it's important to me to continue to do this because, people need to know there are alternatives to the healthcare system, and there are local people that are amazing healers, practitioners. There's lots of products that are made in Canada, right here in Nova Scotia, that can assist on one's path to healing. So that's pretty exciting. So it'll be September 21st at 111 Drysdale Road in Spryfield, and at the rec center, the back of the building. So
Wow, that's cool. And you've been providing this community wellness leadership for, you said this is the 15th expo?
yep, I believe I started it in 2012. For 14 years, yeah. It's been an exciting opportunity for me just to meet, people doing various things. It's a great group of people, always new faces, always new services, new products, new businesses popping up. Lots of startup energy, which I love, that sort of those entrepreneurial spirits. I include artists as well because I am an artist and I believe art is a part of healing. Art making is a part of healing. So there'll be beautiful art pieces, and it's just a great event. And all my clients at Halifax Acupuncture receive free tickets.
This is so cool. I am going to make sure that I help promote that event because it's something that community members can certainly take part in, especially listeners who are in Halifax Regional Municipality and who knows, maybe beyond.
And the building is wheelchair accessible because that is the building I actually helped bring wheelchair accessibility to. That is the building I spoke about earlier. Yep.
Okay, that's fantastic. Well, Angel, thank you so much for being part of the podcast. You've definitely given us quite a bit to think about. And that's what I love about sharing on this platform. We need to be hearing more real life stories and realistic representation of anti ableism and disability inclusion. And it's also so important to hear from our allies that are in the community who are out there working alongside of us to help build those more inclusive, compassionate community spaces.
I just want to say thank you so much for including me in this podcast. It's an honor to be here, and it's a privilege to be able to speak about my mother and her struggles and her journey in her lifetime. So I really value the time that we've shared, and I'm just so happy that you're doing this podcast and raising awareness for people that, there's lots of people out there that don't have awareness. So you're doing a great job of bringing light to those dark places, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody, for listening along to the Finding Avalon podcast. You can find me anywhere you get your podcasts. And if you have a minute and enjoy Finding Avalon, you can support my work by giving it a follow, rating it, sharing it with others you think it might resonate with, and leaving a comment so that it can reach even more people. Special artist thanks and credit for the unreleased feature song Coal Miner, written by Steve Hoskins, arranged by Naomi Kavka, and performed by Naomi Kavka, Bryn Porter, and Tony Kostelik. Until next time, let's be good to each other and fight for disability inclusion wherever we are with whatever we have, because it takes a community. See you soon!